Okay, so now we have the second piece cut. And I just want to make sure that, yeah, okay, it's still in view. So my goal is to solder these two together, okay? Most times when we're soldering, we're not, like, I would never really solder these two things together like so. I would maybe just cut a larger sheet, right? But we're using this as practice so that when you have the silver wire for your ring, that you will know how to join two ends side by side and solder them. So one really important thing in this process, whether it's scrap pieces of copper or your silver wire, the two ends that you intend to join together should have 0 daylight between them, okay? So meaning that, here, let me draw it out for you. So if these are my two pieces of metal, maybe I was lazy in terms of filing the edge, and I've got this little sliver of daylight between them. I'm going to use my pink marker to highlight that. So maybe they touch perfectly at one end, but then these two pink spots are negative space between the two pieces of metal. No. Okay, you want them completely touching. The solder is not meant to fill gaps. It is simply meant to join two pieces. So don't use it as a filler. That is what's going to result in a weak joint, not the fact that you used hard solder versus easy solder. So when the two pieces of metal butt up against each other, they should be completely seamless. So no daylight between them. So this is going to be part of your careful work and observation. If you have terrible eyes like me, you want your reading glasses on. If you still can't tell, that's where the magnifying visors come into play. Okay, so no daylight between the two pieces. Real easy with straight cuts, theoretically, right? But if you think about, like, if I'm cutting an S-curve or any kind of organic shape, that's going to be more challenging. So I'm just filing the piece that I cut on the shear to get rid of the edges. Okay, and just for the sake of time, I am going to kind of cheat a little bit and just choose the two sides that are the most straight.
So you achieved the tight joint by filing?
By filing, by cutting a straight line,
But like, let's say you didn't cut a straight line. Like
yeah, I would file it. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if you want to come up and look at this, feel free to do that. Just look at how those two pieces of metal are touching, and there's no gaposis whatsoever.
Okay.
So Jasmine's pointing out the top and the bottom areas.
Is there any corners of it?
Like
I'm
she's pointing at the bottom. Like see this part?
Oh yeah, that
Does
tiny
that-
little.
Does that matter? Like there we go. See?
Good.
Like that
Yeah.
little. Okay, you're.
We know who to come for the
I
quality
know.
control.
Exactly. I guess that's a good thing. Take a picture and then zoom in.
Yeah.
Do her jewelry well.
Yeah.
Me, not so much.
Thanks, Jasmine. And now
I mean,
it-
technically speaking, that's such a negligible gap that it wouldn't really matter, right?
No, but it's good to point out. I mean, like we are striving for perfect joinery. Okay. I think that's.
Do you use soldering for aesthetic purposes or?
Sometimes people will use soldering for aesthetic purposes, yeah. We'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to continue now. So now I have my two pieces cut. I have filed them so that they are touching each other, no daylight in between them. And now I'm ready to start cleaning them because now I've touched these a whole lot. So even though the filed edges might be technically clean, but like I keep picking them up and touching them, so now they are not clean. So I'm gonna set these down. I'm gonna remove the bench pin so it's out of my way. And I'm gonna open up brand new soldering block. Yes, absolutely.
I was looking for this.
I'm also wondering if it's too much plastic for You also want to move away too much plastic.
Anything that's flammable, get it out of the way, right? So, and just having an organized workspace is always advisable. Okay, so I want to be a little bit closer to my work surface. I just want to double check the edges that I'm soldering. Okay. So now comes the cleaning part. So what you're going to use is some sandpaper. This grit is 220. It can, it doesn't have to be 220, but I'm choosing something that has a little bit of tooth. I'll pass it around so that you can feel it. When you're tearing down sandpaper, bend it so that you are, the gritty side is on the interior, and just pinch along the seam and it will just break apart, okay? That's how you get nice square pieces of sandpaper. So I'm going to locate the edges that I intend to solder, and that is what I'm going to sand.
what's the purpose to sand?
The sanding is what cleans the metal.
Oh, clean, okay.
So when I sand this, I am removing any surface dirt, oil, debris. And I'm going to just be thorough and sand both sides. You could sand the entire piece if you want, because you know, when you sand it, it is leaving a mark. It's leaving texture. So if you want it to be uniform for aesthetic purposes, you can sand the whole thing, but I'm mostly concerned with about a 1/4 inch from the edge to the edge to make sure that that is clean. And then I won't touch that edge ever again. You
I
have,
was gonna say, does the sandpaper affect your edge at all?
I mean, it can, you know, certainly if I'm trying to knock out one tiny last little divot or bump, you know, I could, this is another way you could reshape the metal, is to lay the sandpaper flat
Oh, okay.
and just kind of drag it.
But you're using a gentle touch with the sandpaper then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going super crazy with it. Okay, so again, with the other piece, okay. So now both pieces are sanded. I'm butting them up against one another. I'm going to zoom in. A little bit more.
Is there any way to make it darker? The image I saw on the screen.
To make it darker, I mean, we could turn off the lights. If you can't see. So, right behind that plant that doesn't seem to be doing so well, not that one, but yeah, press the, yeah, there you go.
Good.
Okay, so now comes my flux application, and I'm basically going to apply the flux to the area that I just sanded. So flux is cleaning the metal a little bit, but it's also doing something else, where when you take the torch to the surface of the metal, it is an oxidation shield. So what can prevent a good solder join is the oxygen kind of getting to the surface of the metal and prohibiting a nice clean join. So part of what solder does is prevent that oxygen from getting in the way and allow the solder to penetrate that little tiny valley where we've just filed the edges. And for the solder join to happen smoothly. So I'm going to use the hard just to kind of show you how that goes. I'm gonna try to cut the edge of this with my little snips here. I don't know how successful that will be. Oh, okay. So I'm cutting, I mean, literally the pallium that I'm cutting is 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter, which is so tiny, right? You do not need a lot of solder to create a strong join. In fact, you want to work as minimally as possible so that, let's say I'm not soldering silver right now. I'm soldering copper pieces. So if I use too much solder, you'll see it, right? So you want to try to use as little as possible. I'm gonna have you reach into the drawer one more time and grab the tweezers. And I'm not,
Which drawer?
one of the bottom ones. So the way to, yeah, thank you. The way to cut these itty bitty little pallium pieces is to kind of hover the whole thing over the palm of your hand. And whether you can use scissors or other kinds of snips, but just try to close your palm and hopefully the pallium is there, but this is how small it is, okay? It's like a slightly, like a piece of rock salt.
I can't see it.
It's right here. That's how small it is.
Oh my. Oh, wow.
Okay, so teeny tiny.
I'm having rivet deja
Okay, so this is why your pointy tweezers are important, right? Now I hope you're seeing the reason why these are a really handy tool. So I'm gonna pick up my pallium, I'm gonna place it right down in the middle. If it doesn't stick, stop sticking. Right down in the middle of, right on the seam. Right on the seam and right between the two pieces. Yes, of course.
Can I take a picture of that?
Yep, I'll take a picture. It's just a tiny little flea on a piece of copper.
One more time, how you spell that?
Pallion. So a piece of solder is right there.
So will that just then melt, move, and?
So there's a saying that flux goes, what is it? Solder goes where, something about goes and flows. Why am I can't find the words right now. Flux goes where solder flows, something like that. So basically, where you apply the solder and where your metal has been cleaned, that's how you're telling the solder where to go, okay? And before I turn on the torch, your goal is to, the way that you make the solder flow, meaning it turns from that tiny little square into liquid and fills that gap, is by heating the metal, not the solder, okay? So you're heating the two pieces of metal and bringing it up to the temperature that the solder melts at, okay? So I'm gonna turn on the torch, which this one has just, you turn the knob a little bit. Oh, am I out of gas? Ooh, maybe I am out of gas. Okay, so you get to see how this gets filled.
You have to shake that?
No.
No.
So you're literally just inserting the red nozzle into the bottom.
Peter, do you have to wait for the flux to dry?
I mean, it dries so quickly, but no, not necessarily. Okay. There we go. Now we have a little bit of gas and a flame. Okay. So I just want to point out, like, even though this is kind of the tip of my visible flame, that's not how far out the heat goes. Like the heat, I can feel it out here. So that's just something to be aware of, just because you can't see too much beyond this blue point. Like this is hot out here, okay? Just be aware of that. It's cool in here. Not that you want to put your finger in there, but this is the coolest part of the flame. Out here is fairly cool, but you can still feel some heat. The hottest part of the flame is right at the tip of the visible flame, okay? And then you turn the knob to turn it off. Or, you know, if you need a little bit more flame, the louder the hiss, the bigger the flame, the more heat you're gonna get. So get everything flammable out of the way. Make sure that, you know, a foot or so in front of the torch head, you don't have anything flammable in the way, okay? And in order to do this, I don't need anything much beyond that. So now I'm going to approach a little bit slowly, because what can happen is that the wind from the flame kind of blows your little pallion away. So you'll notice when I first start doing the flame over the flux bubbles. That's okay, that's good, we want that. So I'm kind of passing the torch back and forth on either side. Notice that the metal is changing color. Where I applied the flux, it's a little bit more white. And now the flux is starting to melt, and it's flowed, and I'm done. Okay, one thing I did not get is a little quenching bowl. You take a picture. So it might be stating the obvious, but the piece of metal is very hot right now.
And how did you notice it was down?
Because the solder disappears. And it's beyond just like it'll kind of move a little bit, but it literally turns to liquid and flows like water, right? So that's what you're waiting for. And then just toss it into a little bucket of water, and that's quenching your metal. Okay. And then I would take a brass brush to this to kind of clean away some of the soot. But now I'll pass that around, and if you look very carefully, you will see that that tiny little pallion of solder is now a silver line between the two pieces of copper. I put it on the center, right in between the two pieces where they meet.
So you just put the two pieces where you want it to be, right?
Well, they have to be touching,
Yeah.
right? So no daylight in between the two pieces.
And
Yeah.
then on top of it,
Yep.
in the middle, you put the
Pallion? Yes. Yeah.
How strong is the seam? I assume I could just snap it. I'm gonna try it.
Try it. Well, let's pass it around first so that everyone can see it.
Yeah.
And then we'll see how strong it is.
And Mika, the flax, where did you put the flax? Only on the edge, or
Just
or
on the edge,
where you want the
where I want the solder to flow. Yeah.
So you absolutely do not want to put flax not where the seam is, like on the surface, and clean it too?
You don't need to clean the entire surface. And yes, if you want to control where the solder is going, apply the flux to that area.
If you cut a piece of the solder too big
Mm-hmm.
and you heat it, does it flow thick or will it just run off onto the brick?
You'll get just more of like a puddle.
That's not good.
Yeah, it's just not good for aesthetics, right? So, because you all can see the silver as I'm passing around the piece of copper, right? If
You
I,
cannot see, but we're trying to see.
but if you use, the question was, can you use too much solder? And I mean, for joining purposes, no, not necessarily, but for visibility purposes, yes, right? So in the beginning, it's okay if you use a larger piece of solder just to kind of get it done, but like as you become more and more expert at it, I would say you want to minimize how much silver solder you use so that it is not visible.
So when, let's say you did it perfectly, would you see the line still with the metal, or does it become smooth, like the soldering joint?
You'll see
always see
a
a line?
tiny, I mean, if it's silver on silver, you won't, but
Oh, okay.
in this scenario, it's gonna be really hard. And the key to knowing whether or not it flowed enough is to flip the piece over. And if you don't see a silver line on the bottom, that's not a thorough join.
Can you do it again?
Yes,
Oh.
you can do it again. Sometimes, and that's why sometimes people prefer to work on the screen instead, because you can just heat it from underneath, and that will actually draw the solder through.
So this solder is silver.
Mm-hmm.
It's sterling silver?
Mhm.
Just so if you want a different material because you don't want it to silver, like what you did, you soldered two copper pieces.
Yeah, you can buy like gold solder. I've actually been really curious about this and need to do a little bit more research because I do a lot of brass jewelry. So, and it's been the bane of my existence is like, getting rid of that trace amount of silver solder. And I was, YouTube University, just like watching and someone mentioned something about like a copper solder. So I need to investigate that a little bit more.
So where you place the solder, you'll always have that little blob or a little trace where you
Unless you can like use even less. Yeah.
Is it not something you like want to sand down? Because that could like.
You can. No, you can
Oh.
sand it. Yep. In fact, I've had to do that on a few pieces where, that is something that you can do is sand it down to get rid of the evidence of the solder.
Well, when you mentioned you can like saw the flame to the backside,
Mm-hmm.
would that draw that little trace of silver down?
Not completely. No, I think, maybe if you're lucky, but I don't know. Did you have a question too? Oh, you didn't get to see it. Yes, of course. And then after it's been passed around, we're gonna do the bend test.
So clarifying, there is a statement earlier that I missed where you want the solder to go all the way to the very, very edge of the joint.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially think about it. If you're doing a ring and you don't you want that it becomes one whole piece. So if the solder's not flowing all the way to the edge, then it's not I wouldn't consider that a complete join.
Ever want the solder to go slightly over the edge? So you have your seam, but over the corners of both of them, do you ever want that to go over and flow that way too? I'm not sure.
I mean,
So like the top and bottom edges, not just the seam?
not.
Or is
The
that
top
overkill?
and, oh, like if
Like a
it's a
T?
thick piece?
So, kind of like the piece right now, you have your seam right here.
Yeah.
You have your top edge and you have a bottom edge
Yeah.
here. Do you ever want your solder to flow over just a little bit?
I
on
don't know
those?
that it, I mean, this goes all the way to the edges. But I don't know, maybe it does roll over, I'm not sure what it does.
But I hear what you're saying, would make it stronger if you had like a T-joint.
Yeah, like a T-joint. Like, do you ever want that to happen, or is that just overkill?
I don't know that it's necessary. This is a flush joint, right? We will at some point practice, like what you're saying, like a T-joint. And if you use enough solder, it will automatically go to the edges, especially if you've painted flux all the way to the edges. So,
Okay.
I don't know
get
if
it.
I'm answering your question
No, it is.
completely. Okay. Okay, yes, Haywan.
And then, I don't know if you covered this, but why silver for soldering?
Because it's relatively strong and a lot of the jewelry that we're making is out of silver.
Because we are looking at.
Yeah. So, practicing on cheaper scrap is just a cost-effective way to go. But it's also going to allow you to see if you did a good join, right? Because it's a different color, you can check both sides to see, did you draw the solder down through, and did it puddle, right? So we're noticing that one little dot of silver solder puddle.
When you were soldering with the flame,
Mm-hmm.
were you, I was trying to watch your hand movements, but it seemed like you were just kind of not doing a lot. You were just.
No,
going
I'm not
back.
like herky-jerky, like
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
it around, like you want to, it's kind of a fine balance of like, so what I was saying about slow approach, like I don't immediately like zoom in and put the torch right there. I'm heating from afar to let the flux to start to bubble, and that helps to glue the pallium down.
Okay.
So the flux, after it bubbles and then it settles and it looks kind of clear and gummy, it is kind of sticky.
Okay.
And so that helps to kind of glue your solder into place. And then the only movement I'm doing then is just between the two pieces to try to heat them evenly. Okay, so I'm kind of like, I'm barely rocking from one side to the other. And remember, your goal is not to heat the little pallium of solder. You are heating the metal that it's sitting upon and bringing that metal up to the melting temperature of the
I
solder.
was thinking you were moving the pallium, so no, you're
No.
heating it up to a bubble and then you're going back and forth to the
Yeah.
other pieces.
And it is not uncommon to blow your piece of solder away. That happens a lot. So some people suggest using the torch in your it's not a submissive hand. You know what I mean, your non-dominant hand, right? So that you can have your solder tweezers or a pick in your right hand in case the solder moves, you can quickly kind of move it back into place. So you can play around with that too. I'm not going to say like you must solder, you hold the torch in your non-dominant hand, because I think in the beginning you're just trying to get used to the whole process, period. Okay. Any other questions?
Does they do the soldering? Do we need to wear protect goggles?
No. No, but I would say like you don't want any loose dangly, or like, maybe I should have probably tied my hair up, or, yeah, you just want to be smart about using an open flame. Yeah, but this activity is not really something where, it's not like you're grinding the metal, right? You're just heating it. So I can't really think of a reason why like something would blow back in your face. but I could be wrong. Don't prove me wrong. Yes, go on.
So my kitchen torch,
Yeah,
the flame isn't as fine as yours.
Yeah.
It's a little broader.
yeah.
So is that gonna be a problem?
I would say let's just try it and see. So but this is why I love this thing so much, is that it is very precise, because I did a lot of soldering at home with a propane torch, and man, it is just like, it's very messy. It takes a lot longer. So I think what can happen with a less precise torch tip is that maybe the heat is not concentrated in the right way, and it might just take a little bit longer. Yeah.
So Major, what is the difference in the highest temperature between propane and butane?
You are asking a question I don't know the answer to.
I was looking through my notes, and someplace I read that the propane is good for working with blacks
Yes,
and the butane for metals.
Yes.
So there must be a huge difference in the temperatures.
I mean, you can use a propane torch and solder. It is possible.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a dirtier flame. So sometimes jewelers will set up, like if it's a dual system, so oxygen and acetylene, but they'll do oxygen and propane, and that will kind of like boost the power, the heating power.
Well, that'll be the hottest of the three, right?
Yes. Yeah. All right. Any other questions before I try to test the strength of my join? Okay, here we go. Thanks, Sonia. But now the copper is really soft because that's another term I should mention, annealing metal. So ANNEALING, to
Say it again?
anneal, ANNEAL. To anneal the metal means to soften it. And you're softening it by heating it. Okay, so that just, and so Jasmine, back to your point of like, do you need to clean the whole surface? I wouldn't necessarily, just because every time you use the torch, the metal's gonna get kind of dirty, and you'll need, so it's just repeat. But, okay, so is that satisfactory enough? You want me to bend it like right on the solder join? I can tell by the look in her eye that yes, the answer is yes. But here's the thing, like the silver is a stronger metal, so I'm finding it kind of hard to actually crease it. Yeah, the copper's weaker than the silver, so I'll pass that around if you want to see it. Okay, let's take a break, and then when we come back in 10 minutes, you all will get to practice this.
So I didn't bring any materials because I thought we weren't doing anything.
That's okay.
today.
I will, if we don't have